This is big.
It's a very emotional moment.
We're both feeling it, Austin. I think we're both feeling it. Also, he was the former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, also an economics professor at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and then 3 members of what is called the Job Creators Alliance, not to be confused with the President's Council on Jobs. This is more of a private sector council. Brad Anderson, former CEO of Best Buy. John Allison, former CEO of BB&T, and now at Wake Forest, right?
Yes, sir.
Your idea was like monumental to me, and that is you will grant money to any college that will include a little bit of objectivism in the curriculum, free market objectivism, right?
Yes, sir.
Explain that. How much would you give a college if they would just include, what a concept, to include something about the free markets at a college?
Well, we now have 68 universities that teach what we call the moral foundations of capitalism. We believe that capitalism has to be defended from a moral perspective, not just, it doesn't just work, it works because it's consistent with man's nature. And we have a group of professors that are defenders of individual rights and free markets, and we've got 25,000 students going through this.
How much money will a university get?
It varies. Smaller colleges, we commit $500,000. Big universities, we're up to $2 million.
I'm just wondering whether University of Chicago might. What about the idea?
I could use $2 million.
You could use some of that free market stuff. And Tom Stemberg is also here. He's the founder of Staples. Great to have all of you here. We're going to have fun. Although it's tight on the set right now, isn't it?
I feel like it's
like King Arthur almost at the round table. All right. Austin, we should start with you. And I saw some. I love what you're saying about Europe, taking a hard look at what the outlook is. It's scary, but since we have these guys here, we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's talk about our own problems here. Your point, and you're very strident about this, is that the programs the administration took early on, it would have been a lot worse right now had they not been taken.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think. Look, the economy's not in a great spot, but it's a lot better than it would have been. And I think when we were at a moment where we're losing 800,000 jobs a month and we're in the worst 6 months of GDP growth ever in the data that in the 64 years we've been keeping it, the only thing there is when the private sector's in free fall was to have the government trying to prevent a depression. I think they will look back and say that was an accomplishment, but I think the moment we're in now is slightly different, and that is the government should be taking policies to get the private sector to be leading the recovery.
When I read that, I just wanted to pose, because that's the counterfactual argument that we get from Mark Zandi. He's going to be on the show later today, too. And the counterfactual argument is really hard to argue against. I wanted to ask you sort of the inverse or the converse of your argument. I know, I'm going to confuse you. Mine is, would you say that there's any possibility that Obamacare and in spending a year and a half, we can't prove the counterfactual on whether that has hurt job creation? Would you concede that it's possible that some of the policies actually were deleterious to getting this economy going?
I'm totally willing to look at the data if you can show me where in the data that is.
Oh, but data, I think so. You're talking like Zandy's data, some of that crazy Keynesian multiplier stuff?
I'm talking about like the jobs data. I'm not talking about theories. So on the counterfactual, I think you can see that before the administration comes in and passes its policies, conditions are bad and they're getting worse every month. And then they start passing the policies and it starts
We've
improving.
had recessions before. We always come out of a recession, sooner or later. I mean, that's going to happen. Do you guys think that there's...
And so then take the health care. Take the health care.
Austin, to start with, when the president took over, unemployment was under 8%. Today it's 9%. I don't think that's getting better, is it?
Look, guy goes up with the TV to the top floor of your house, lets go of it, and says, hey, the last time I touched it, the TV looked great. I mean, the president comes in the middle of a total free fall.
He's been there for a couple of years now, hasn't he?
In 2010, the economy's growing faster than productivity. The unemployment rate comes down quite substantially, more than a point, and we add 2.5 million jobs over 17 months. In 2011, we get the price of gasoline goes way up. We get the events in Japan. We get the first inklings of the problems in Europe. The economy slows down to less than productivity. It's not surprising the unemployment rate.
When you hear guys like Brad
or
when you hear about regulations, you hear about Obamacare, you hear about the specter of higher taxes. I mean, it's really the argument of our generation right now that we continue to have, isn't it?
There's no question the regulations reducing employment in the United States. Anybody running a business knows that. First, the context. Remember, business people enjoy creating jobs. We're all builders. Yeah, we like money, but money's not what motivated most of us. We like building our business. We'd like to be growing our businesses today. If we're not growing them, it's because there's some obstacle created by government. Classically, in this case, we're a massive regulatory attack in the banking business.
Why does it have to be created by government? Can't it be demand?
No. Yeah, it is. Look, the fact that we see the same pattern playing out in companies in all the advanced economies of the world. If you look at the companies in Germany, in the UK, in Japan, in Canada, they're all accumulating cash on their balance sheet. They're all not investing in long-term assets because they're nervous there's going to be another financial crisis. They're nervous that there's not demand in the world economy. Those are the main uncertainties.
No, they're nervous the government's going to kill us. That's one way or the other.
All those governments are going to kill us.
Yes,
all of those
Austin, he's BB&T, he's Best Buy, and he's Staples. And that's why I have these.
Then what are you?
I have these arguments with Andrew. When a CEO is telling me the reason I'm not doing something is because of this, and when then someone says no, it's not. I mean, don't they know why they're not doing things?
All I'm asking you is then why are in places where they haven't had
Obamacare?
Changes to their health care system, they have a totally different policy response. Why are we observing the same thing in those countries? That's what doesn't make sense.
Well, I mean, the U.S. economy is important enough to hurt the rest of the world.
And it's the U.S. economy that historically leads us out. And it's the U.S. economy where the economic freedom really is in the world.
Right.
And our role has traditionally been to lead us out by creating new energy. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I've taught literally to dozens of small businesses. That's what BB&T's a small business bank that aren't hiring because they don't understand what their health care cost is going to be. It's not so much that they know it's going up. They just don't know what it means. And they are afraid they're going to get stuck with employees that they're going to have to provide health care for the rest of their lives, whether they're employed or not. That's a fact. And also the other thing is that raising the minimum wage 41% in the face of a recession was an interesting thing because the all-in cost to a small business now of an entry-level worker is about $10 an hour. Well, a lot of these small businesses can't afford to pay $10 an hour, so they're not hiring, and particularly young people that are just getting through an unsuccessful high school experience, really.
And you look at this 2,700-page bill, and you can do a lot of damage in 2,700 pages. There's things in there that are simply anti-capitalist. The notion that you legislate that an insurance company on the lower income associates can only make 10%. What if you could find, and 90% has got to go to claims. Well, what if you're clever enough and your people are clever enough to find 2% savings? You could give 1% back to the customer and keep 1%. No, that's against the law. Because in the 2,700 pages, we basically socialized how the thing is supposed to work. The ratio that you force the insurance companies to charge no more than 3 times for an older person than you do for a younger person. Well, the health care ratio between a 65-year-old's cost and a 25-year-old's cost is not 3 to 1, it's more than 6 to 1. Basically, you're asking the young people to subsidize the old. And this is all in 2,700 incredibly nefarious pages that do damage to business. This is not good for the economy.
Look, I'm not a congressional legislature. I'm sure that if you start looking into the details of any of these things, there are. I don't know the specific provisions you're talking about. I do know that if you go if you go try to get the details of, say, your credit card agreement, it's many hundreds of pages when you start looking into the details. If you get the actual contract language of one credit default swap, it's extremely complicated. Right. So I don't think the fact that they passed a bill about that health care.
Austin, did you see that Lee Cooperman open letter to President Obama that he wrote earlier?
The one about the rhetoric?
Yeah, the one about the rhetoric. Do you think that... I mean, I have some sympathy for the president because he's getting hammered from his base, and so I see that you have to talk the talk sometime when you were elected by certain constituencies. But do you think that can affect business? That being the divisiveness.
My view, yes,
has there been an anti-business sentiment?
Taken to extreme. Now, in my view, I think there's a pretty significant chunk of things that 2/3 of the country could agree on that are basically pro-growth and that we ought to be doing. I think we've got a dangerously dysfunctional system in Washington that does not allow us to do the things that we can't agree on. I'm sure there's 50 things that we could argue about, but why start with those 50 things? That's what I don't. That's the thing I find frustrating about Washington. But if you look at the record of 2010. As I say, we were growing, and actually we were adding millions of jobs. We have an 18-month period where we add 2.5 million jobs, which would be a decent record even in an expansion. So I think the question we should be asking is, why did we slow down in 2011 instead of saying these underlying factors, the health plan? The health plan was there in 2010, but we were able to add more than 2 million jobs over this period.
But with the depth of the recession that we saw, some people still think that the seriousness of the job situation was underestimated and should have been job one instead of a year and a half of acrimonious debate on transforming the health, on really a partisan transformation of the healthcare. Most of these, if you take 17% of the economy, normally you would want some type of bipartisan agreement to change that much of the system, and it wasn't done. And I think that's where a lot of this debate.
In fairness to the president, he was all but begging the Republicans to come to the table with their ideas.
You read behind that. You were there. I hear some of the pragmatists in his administration wanted to do cover children, the existing conditions, go ahead and cover that. Get a law that we can get 80 senators to vote for and do it that way.
I don't think you could have got 80 senators.
Well, okay, you could have passed it with some bipartisan. You didn't need to do reconciliation.
Mitch McConnell has, in the same interview in which he said his number one goal was to defeat the president, said, we decided that if we could hold together, the president wanted to be a bipartisan president, but if we wouldn't vote for what he said, it would be impossible for him to be bipartisan.
Remember, Austin, it wasn't what the president said. He handed the bill over to Nancy Pelosi to write. It wasn't like he came with a vision, here's what health care ought to work like. And that's what leaders do.
I don't think that's fair.
The legislation was written. Well, he complained afterwards that they wrote it and it wasn't his fault.
Well, yes, Congress writes legislation, and it can look very messy when they do that. But I don't think it's fair to say that the president didn't have an idea of what they were looking for in health care. I don't think that's...
Do you think that there's I look at all these places, whether it's food or medical or transportation or energy, part of what we're concerned about is the horizon, where within the government there is a lot of activity to really write constraining regulations that go substantially further than we're at. And one of the factors we're concerned about is that you'd have to, when you're trying to create or growing a business, you have to look at what the horizon looks like. And with that kind of regulatory climate that's in virtually every department in the administration, how do we get at, or don't you think that is having an impact on our economy?
I think two things. One, if any agency is making mistaken regulations, if we've got things that are either inefficient or impairing the growth of small businesses, we ought to go look at that, and we ought to get rid of regulations that aren't working. I think, though, a mentality that says the only thing that's good for business is getting rid of all regulations and ripping up the rules of the road, I kind of think if you look at the financial system and what havoc it's wreaked on the economy from ripping up the rules of the road so that we lost public trust in financial markets, I think that mentality took a heavy blow in the financial crisis. It doesn't mean that what replaced it is exactly perfect, but
the financial industry was not deregulated. We were misregulated. We passed 3 major laws under Bush: the Privacy Act, the Patriot Act, and Sarbanes-Oxley. We misregulated the risk system. The cause of the financial crisis wasn't the mistakes on Wall Street, although a number of firms should have failed. I would have voted for that. It was government policy that goes all the way back. You're wrong. Goes all the way back to Lyndon Baines Johnson to try to create affordable housing. And because I saw this over my 30-year career, I think
you can probably point a lot of fingers of blame.
I think there were a lot of fathers.
If you're trying to say that
Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae.
Look, economists hated Fannie and Freddie.
They had
a business model where guys get to pocket profits for for years, and then when everything goes wrong, dump it on the government. That was a recipe for failure, and it failed. And so I'm not going to. But to try to blame that is like, you remember the year the Detroit Lions were 0-16?
Listen,
they had a bad kicker. You can't blame them being 0-16 on them having a bad kicker. There's a lot of blame to go around.
Had $2.5 trillion.
But there were a lot of problems to go around. It was consumers who were borrowing more than they should have.
But we've now decided it was Wall Street.
Freddie and Fannie had $2.5 trillion
Wall Street absolutely was.
But
Fannie and Freddie didn't back the budget. Fannie and Freddie were not the majority of subprime mortgages.
Yes, they were.
No, they were not.
Yes,
the worst performing subprime mortgages have nothing to do with Fannie and Freddie.
That's not mathematically true.
Yes, mathematically that is true. I'll get the data for you.
I've already looked at the data. And also, they drove them. I was in the mortgage business. I saw this. Government policy put intense pressure on the banking industry, going all the way back to the early 70s to do subprime lending. The banks weren't prepared to do it. And the Community Reinvestment Act, Fair Housing, and then Bill Clinton.
The Community Reinvestment Act has been in place for decades. We had a financial crisis after they deregulated and allowed these entities to go into businesses that they weren't in before.
It went exponential because increased pressure under Bill Clinton set a goal for Freddie and Fannie to have half of their mortgage portfolio in subprime lending. That drove everybody down because
Republicans and Democrats.
And Republicans contributed to. I'm not saying.
Yeah. To allow investment banks to massively lever up to a greater degree than they did before.
That was a factor.
Allows to put an unbelievable risk onto the system that blows up.
Who took the big losses? Have you figured out the losses that Freddie and Fannie already have?
Well, the taxpayers.
The taxpayers. It's going to be over $1 trillion before it's over. They were the driver.
They were awful.
They were the driver.
I've never been a fan, and no economist is a big fan of a business model of socialize your losses and keep all your profits.
Right.
But to try to say that is the cause of the financial crisis, it just strains the bounds of credulity.
It's
mathematically certain that the banks were not involved.
No. I'm not saying.
I can agree that Fannie and Freddie was one leg of the crisis.
It was no question.
Absolutely. And you could say that Wall Street was another leg of the crisis. This is a crisis that has many fathers.
It was the primary driver.
I don't agree with that.
I was in the mortgage business and saw them driving down the standard, and we didn't do it. So we didn't get in trouble because we didn't do it. But they were driving down the standards, and they were also incenting people like Countrywide. They were incenting Washington Mutual because there was intense pressure on the banking industry to provide affordable housing.
They were bad. They were a leg of the crisis.
They were in search of
deregulation of the financial sector and the activities that got well beyond what they should have been doing.
But Austin, the pure size of the banks made them systemic, so that we had to subsidize all that private risk. Unfortunately,
and the connectedness,
right? But we still do.
What?
Right? Do we need to break them up? Do we need to?
Well, see, I don't think it was size. It's an interesting idea. I wonder what your guys' view is on that.
If we had let them fail,
I don't think it was just size. You could take Bank of America and say you were a person that said, let's break up the banks. You could break Bank of America into 6 pieces, and every one of those pieces would be bigger than Bear Stearns.
Right.
It wasn't the size that made Bear Stearns dangerous. It's how connected it is. So that's why I think on addressing too big to fail, they got to work on the connectedness.
Thing or a Glass-Steagall thing? Or?
Well, that's a bit of a separate issue.
Because it would have worked. If everything's
but like the derivatives and the counterparties.
Ultimately the leverage. I mean goes back to Rogoff and Reinhardt, that you can have as many bad actors as you want on the stage doing as many bad things, the regulators, the bankers, everybody could do things, but as long as there's not enough leverage in the system, you can't really spark the fire.
If you can fail, you learn your lesson. This is a huge mistake thinking this is a bad actor. You're talking about it was multiple administrations. The Bush administration was proudest of the fact that the home ownership reached the highest level in U.S. history under the Bush administration, which was all based on these practices. And it is interlinked.
I don't think the construction industry didn't like what was happening.
Absolutely. And as long as prices went up on housing, it was a social virtue in every context.
But Andrew, you would stop if your company goes under and you lose all your stock and all your employees, you don't leverage next time. But they didn't go under. So I figure leverage.
No, I think Andrew's right. If you look at the internet bubble,
take care of itself.
It was predominantly an equity bubble. It wasn't leverage. So when it popped, the damage to the entire credit system of the United States is quite limited.
Right.
So I do think if you did, and if you look across countries, those that had more equity in their system, those that had the lower loan-to-value ratios on their houses, fared far better in this financial crisis. I think that's quite true. But I think there's more than just that. Yes, you could have somewhat solved the problem if you had less leverage. But we had a whole lot of things going wrong at the same time. And so I just think
it was almost a societal, motivation to increase home ownership. And we were all, how about the flippers? Who that owned a house didn't like what was happening, too?
The flippers, there were a whole bunch of actors on that side.
Everybody who owned a house.
But it's not just to be blamed on the homeowners. That's what I think. There are multiple legs on this stool, and just saying, hey, it was Fannie and Freddie and the government encouraging home ownership. They have been encouraging home ownership for a long time. But it was multiplied with something else that leads that to blow up in the late 2000s.
But nobody should have been surprised by the private sector trying to maximize profits if given the chance. And then you throw AI, and then you throw AIG, and you throw AIG in, where everybody could sort of pretend. AIG, you could pretend to be AAA with those credit defaults.
You're totally right.
You're totally right. Perfect storm.
Yeah,
you're totally right.
The systems risk is, by the way, understanding it from the inside, the systems risk is grossly exaggerated. We've been doing business at BB&T with Bear Stearns for, 75 years. If they'd have failed, we'd have said, so what? We had a lot of derivative contracts, but we managed our derivative contracts. We required them to have cash collateral. The derivative contracts are what
everybody did.
Yeah, no, you guys
it would not have taken
exception. That was relatively safe. I mean, if you looked at the...
What the implication of saving Bear was much worse than letting them fail. Because if you look at what happened, Lehman doubled their bets. Why not? If the government's going to bail you out, and you got a downside, you're going to double your bet. So as soon as Bear got...
Lehman didn't double its bets from the time... from the time that Bear Stearns went under to the time that they ultimately collapsed. They were reducing their leverage.
They were reducing their leverage, but they were doubling a lot of their bets in the market because they had no downside risk. And also, they weren't prepared for bankruptcy. Why weren't they prepared for bankruptcy? Because they thought they were going to get saved. That's why the bankruptcy was so messy. We had derivative risk with Lehman's, and
I think that is.
And we didn't trust the government, so we covered our Lehman position. A lot of people did trust the government and actually expanded their derivatives risk because they thought the government was going to bail Lehman out. So very wrong, because Lehman was so much more important than Bear.
I do think that this is an important dynamic. But the thing that's hard to understand is after Bear, the Fed announces we're going to open the discount window to investment banks. And you saw the Bear Stearns people saying, wait a minute, why didn't you do that before we ended? And so the question always was, well, why didn't Lehman just go to the discount window? And the answer was they didn't have the collateral. Right, they couldn't get the loans from the Fed.
But one of the things, the psychology in the market, too, remember there was a lot of perception that Paulson didn't like Lehman, and that was why he let him fail. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But the psychology in the market is terrible when you have government leaders making what appear to be very arbitrary decisions. They saved Citigroup, they let Wachovia fail. A lot of the downfall was unnecessary. I went through 1980s, I went through the early 90s, I'm a long-time CEO. We didn't have the loss of confidence, and this was under George Bush. The arbitrariness of the decisions was stunning. Because why? At one point, they let Citigroup, that was broke and everybody knew it, agree to buy Wachovia. Right. Now, and then they reneged on their contract.
I mean, that was the Paul Volcker, who you know is a good friend and a giant. He is a giant. He is a physical giant. But he was saying as that was going along, look, you can't do, if you do this weekend by weekend.
It's arbitrary.
It's arbitrary, and then everybody says, well, what are the rules? How does it apply? You know, we got to have something more systematic. I do think that was a.
So are we all still friends? I mean, if we were on the super committee, we would have done a damn deal.
See, this is my thing. I think that if you got reasonable people to sit around and say, what does this country need to grow and where do we need to be in 5 years? I think there's a lot of agreement.
I got a little teary just thinking about it.
We're almost out of time on this discussion, but what are the areas where we could reach agreement where we say, yes, this makes a lot of sense, do it right now, do it quickly, and you could get, let's say, 60, 65, 70% of the people to agree?
I got involved with Job Creators Alliance because I really felt, as you got into the dialogue, there weren't reasonable people there.
Yeah.
The issue quickly turned into sort of either blame or political, and there was no grounds to have a sort of reasonable discussion.
Yes.
Because it immediately became which side are you on, as opposed to.
I wonder. Well,
Austin,
you were there. What if these three guys went and sat down with the president and Valerie Jarrett and Axelrod? I think there would be. By the end of it, I think someone might have a black eye or something. I mean,
no, I don't think that's true. The president actually has met many times in private lunches with CEOs of companies to get their ideas, and oftentimes, you know, they can be fairly tough with the president about particular issues, but he doesn't want to get in a fight about that.
Why did he reject? Why did he turn his back to Simpson Bowles? Bipartisan,
Simpson Bowles.
Big,
okay.
Not just
he didn't turn his back. The president offered. I mean, now we get into the debt ceiling negotiation.
He did nothing with it. It was his commission. He did nothing with it.
Now we're drifting apart again.
Yeah, we are.
We're going to have to say thank you, everybody. This has been a tremendous conversation, and we're glad that you could all be here for it. It's been a really great.
John Allison, my friend Brett from Best Buy, and Tom Stemberg, and you'll stay, right?
I'm still here. You can't get rid of me.
No, you were good. You're good. You got Andrew, but
Thank you.
Okay, if you've got comments, questions about anything you just saw, please shoot us an email at squawk@cnbc.com. You can also follow us on Twitter @SquawkCNBC is the handle.